Emotional connection is the holy grail. What a very powerful message. And to build upon emotional connection, it leads us on to our next stream. So to explore bias, belonging, and reconnecting, I'm delighted to be joined by Dena Upton. So Dena is the Chief People Officer at Drift. So Drift are just fresh off announcing a strategic partnership that has just given them a $1 billion valuation. One of the most exciting companies on the East Coast of the US, doing amazing things. Delighted to be joined by Dena. Dena, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Robert. It's great to be here. Thanks for including me. I'm excited. I love this topic. This is part of my business, so to speak. So I love talking about it.
Lovely, but isn't it funny? So when you think about this, so fairness, like the constant retort from my children at home is, Daddy, it's not fair. That's not fair. She got this. That's not fair. Fairness runs deep with us, doesn't it? And when we think about this in a work context, you're actually the first person I've spoken to, Dena, who has said that you deliberately chose not to go with a hybrid model because it's not equal. Why so? And what are your plans at Drift?
Yeah, so, a hybrid approach was never really an option for us because we specifically, David and Elias, our founders, believe that a hybrid approach leads to an inequitable experience. And one of the reasons why Drift was founded by two underrepresented minorities themselves was to build an equitable company. And so, the reason why I say it's not equitable is because, what happens in a hybrid approach is the person that's in the office or the person that's sitting right next to you gets that next assignment, gets that raise, gets that promotion. It's what happens. It's you're right next to that person, so you see them all the time. So I think for us, the reason why we were so deliberate about that statement and pretty intentional around why we were going digital first was because of that. You can have people in the office, you can have them on Zoom calls, but you need to make sure you're communicating that digital is your first approach. So every meeting that you have, every interaction, when you're working on a brainstorming session, you have a Google Doc, everything is done digitally. And then the way you train your managers and how you recruit is with that digital mindset first and foremost. So that's what we mean. It's an important but subtle difference between a hybrid and a digital approach to a work environment.
I hear what you're saying. I think there's a big risk of a new front of inequality amongst hybrid workforces where those who are closest to management build this managerial capital, and those who are closer to the action, if it were, or the office, benefit from a proximity bias nearly. Right. But the same could also be said for those who are in a kind of fully remote environment. Claude spoke earlier about VaynerMedia, about some of the in-office distractions that come with open plan offices, but you also may have a benefit of doing and focusing on high impact work that's as an individual contributor. So there's probably balances and equities on both sides.
Right. And it's never going to be perfect. I think the reason why digital and remote work has been working so well for the past year and a half, right? Like when we all knew we had to do it, is because everybody was forced to do it and everyone was on the same playing field. Like you couldn't go into the office, right? So that idea of sort of being in the office with FaceTime or having that conversation when you leave a meeting wasn't happening. I think the big challenge is going to be when it's safe to go back into the office, how do you make sure you keep that same sort of mentality that you had and that sort of hygiene and those practices that you operated with when everybody was remote, when you have some people kind of coming in and some people working remotely. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this all migrates when we do enter some kind of normal working arrangement.
Yeah, and for us here in Ireland, that's likely to be next Monday, Dena. It's part of our reopening program. You mentioned your two co-founders, David and Elias. I spent time with both of them, Elias here in Dublin and with David Cancel in Boston. And I clearly recall their view on hypergrowth and what was required for hypergrowth. And I recall David telling me in an interview at Boston College that the values and the culture of an in-office environment were essential for hypergrowth. It seems to me that there's been a change in that mood music, and I'm keen to know, if that is the case, how this change in their belief systems have had a knock-on effect to the values of the organization, Dena.
Well, no, it's interesting. You're right. Like when DC and Elias founded Drift 6 years ago, they were very clear about an in-office, and they valued an in-office experience. And that's what contributed to our success to date. And they believed that achieving hypergrowth and becoming the company that we are today was because we were very much an in-office based company. We were super intentional around it. Like that's how we hired. We told people you need to be in the office 5 days a week. This is how we structure our meetings. They're in-person meetings. It's really important. And that's we were kind of in your face around that, right? Like we lost out on talent because they were not in proximity to an office. So we had offices in Boston, San Francisco, Tampa. At that time, we were in Seattle. We hadn't opened up the office in the UK or in Australia at that time, when we were very much in office, in office-based company. But like when you talk to DC and Elias about this, we've kind of gone through a one-way door that we can't go back through. And so they've sort of rethought around all those beliefs that they had around how do you motivate teams? How do you connect with teams? We can't go see our customers, right? Like we at that, when we were in the midst of sort of the throes of COVID, you couldn't jump on a plane to go see a customer. And so they sort of had to re-examine that belief system. And how do we operate in a hypergrowth company where conversations and communication is happening on the fly? How do we do that digitally? And so DC and Elias sort of have kind of reapproached that. Now, we have our leadership principles, as you mentioned. You're talking about values and sort of the value proposition around Drift. Those leadership principles haven't changed, but our approach and how we communicate and how we connect with our team and how do you build relationships in a digital first world, that approach has changed because you're not sitting right next to somebody. You're not in the office with them. One of the things that we've realized over the past year and a half is you have to document how you connect with your teams, right? Like rituals have always been super important to us. Like during hypergrowth, we bookend our weeks. We've always kind of bookend our weeks. We bookend our weeks with, we start out the week in a 20-minute, it's called Monday Metrics. It's led by our VP of Ops. It's one of our leaders in each organization gets up, talks about what's happening in the org, what campaigns we're running, what deals we're trying to close, what new products are we launching? So there's no excuse for anyone across the organization to have a high level understanding of the metrics of the business. That meeting used to happen in person in the office, like things were thrown around, microphones were tossed around. It was super lively. We've switched that to digital, but that ritual still exists. So we can kind of put our arms around the organization digitally on Monday. And then Friday, we bookend the week with what we call Friday Show and Tell. And it's an hour. It's one person from each department that talks about a problem that they solved that week. What's the solution? What's the CTA for the team? It again, historically had happened in the office. Now it's completely virtual, emceed by one of our product leads. It's really interactive. You vote on presentations, the chat goes crazy. And so we've tried to create that same momentum that we had in the office digitally. And so a lot of those rituals that we had before, we've moved them to be and interact with our team in a digital way. But I think the importance and the, of those rituals and what to expect and how you start your week off with the whole Drift team and you end your week with the whole Drift team. So that's what's been super valuable for us, and to make sure that we formalize and have kept those rituals in place.
I might steal that metric Monday piece. I like the sound of that, Dena. Dena, if I was to move it on beyond into the question of reconnecting and belonging and how we can create an environment for that, whether it be virtual, in a fully distributed or in a hybrid environment. I think about the journey our people have been on over the last 18 months, and we've entered into this long distance relationship, it seems to me, whether we like it or not. And in many cases, long distance relationships tend to fizzle, don't they? But I look about the deep individualization of work, and how people identify with their occupation. And you and I have spoken about this before, that one of the top 3 questions you typically ask somebody is like your name, where you're from, what you do for a living. In recruitment, we start with what you do for a living. But it's a big part of our identity. And I think that has lessened over the course of the last 18 months. And a lot of people have had this kind of pandemic epiphany where the broader sense of themselves and the human experience, the broader holistic experience of being human and what truly matters has been part of the reawakening. How do you think that will affect how people now look at their sense of self, and therefore how they reconnect or belong with the organization in the event where we do get together more, or we look to reconnect post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is you like turn the clock back to when, when this first happened, right? A lot of individuals, and there was so much going on in the world at that time. A lot of individuals were looking for their sense of belonging or community from the organization, right? We had to double down in mental awareness, what was happening in the US specifically with racial injustice. And they were looking for organizations to sort of set the tone or set the direction there. I think what's happening as we started to work through the pandemic is that individuals have they're investing in themselves, they're connecting with communities that they hadn't before. And so I think there's, organizations are going to have to figure out how do you welcome and how do you connect with that whole person through an organization, right? There's so many facets of them, things about them that you don't know, and leaders and managers have to tap into, you're showing up for work because in a positive way, because you've invested in yourself, you're connecting with your community. I think organizations are going to have to realize that those boundaries of, when we went into the office, you were compartmentalized, right? You had your, your office self and your home self. And I think now, because those lines are so blurry, it's not so much like work-life balance, but it's just, it's weaving itself into, like, right. I go for a run. I go for a run because it helps me, physically, right? I love running. I'm sort of addicted to it, but I also go because I have my most creative moments. I'm like, oh, that's what I want to do. Like, it helps me physically take care of myself. I'm a better employee because of it. And so it's not this, we're thinking about individuals as a whole, and how can we make sure that we support them in a way that they show up for work with their most creative self, with their most efficient self. And so I think there's such a blending, and it's forced us, because I don't wish COVID on anyone. I wish it didn't happen, but it has accelerated this idea of flexibility, this idea of a whole worker showing up at work because you're a better worker because you have invested in yourself outside of work. So I think it's a different approach to that unique worker, and how do you support them to be their best self at work?
I get that, and I do. It rings true with me. I think this kind of gap in kind of social leadership that I think a lot of our workforce have looked towards the leaders of their organizations for. And we've also become much more vocal and active in societal kind of impact, and to reflect what our people value most into the society in which we exist, which I think is a positive force for good. I also see at the moment a shift in the other direction. And I look at companies like Coinbase, who've been very, very clear, where they've asked people not to bring elements of their social beliefs into the workplace because they think it has an impact on their ability to execute. And there's also an argument that this micro belonging has nearly kind of fragmented parts of the workforce. Did you have any sense of that, how that might play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is sort of transparency, right? Like, like what is the mission of your business? What are you trying to do, right? For us, it's like we're trying to change the way businesses buy from businesses. That is our mission. And I think we're also, because of who we are, right? Like DC and Elias founded Drift there's two reasons they founded Drift, and the order of those are incredibly important. Now, first, to create an enduring and equitable company. And they want to be a role model for what companies around the world, what a diverse workforce looks and acts like, right? And they take that that responsibility very seriously. So we are very vocal about it because that's who our founders are. And then secondly, they started Drift to be the new way businesses buy from businesses. But we can really only achieve that if we have the right people on our team. And so I think it depends on what the mission of the organization is as to how vocal you're going to be about that. For us, both of our founders are underrepresented minorities themselves. They came from nothing, right? Like Elias came from Nicaragua on food stamps to put himself through college. He realizes how hard it has been for him because he hasn't had that advantage. So he takes that responsibility very seriously. So I think organizations need to come from an authentic place as to why they're making a statement in one area or another, right? Like it could be you're working for an organization that is changing the way and we're sustaining energy, right? Like if that's what you do as an organization, then your stance there has to be authentic and come from the right place, and you can be vocal about it. But for organizations just to have these blanket statements around things that there's really no sort of authenticity or reason for why they're doing that, that's candidates can kind of see through that. So I think that's it's interesting to see what's happening right now and as to how vocal certain organizations are going to be.
It's an interesting observation, Dena. And I think in many ways, like I know the two guys they paid us forward hugely, and they're very vocal about their kind of ethnic minority founder background, and they have a leadership role therefore, and they take that very, very seriously. I've spoken to both of them at length about it, but I also think it gives them, and therefore the organization, real heart and soul, and something that we can't fake and we can't create. It's something that comes from here. It's a hearts and minds game, and a game of experiences, really the war for talent now. And again, I think it speaks volumes to how authentic you guys are.
Well, and I think people want, they want to be on that journey with you, right? Like, yes, we want to be helping our customers, but they want to, people want, and when you were talking to DC and Elias, we're incredibly transparent, right? Like a lot of people are here because they want to see what it's like to work at a hyper-growth company, but we're transparent about that we're trying to do. And there's that feeling of sort of being part of and being, and moving the needle on something that's sort of larger than yourself, which is, I think, what the next generation of workers is going to demand from an organization. That piece is very compelling for people. It's powerful to be part of it, and it's fun.
Oh, for sure. And also a mutual friend of ours, Jim Kelleher, isn't shy about his Irishness either, is he?
Yes.
So we recently had him here in Dublin. I'm very keen, Dena, to touch upon again, like unique work practices or anything you're doing around sustaining performance in a distributed world, and how you view compensation, reward, incentive, and motivation now as you enter into like a full-time remote digital first workplace.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating topic because, historically we sort of built our compensation, our reward structure regionally, right? Like you had market compensation depending upon where you lived, right? What was the cost of living depending upon whether or not you were in San Francisco or New York or London or Australia. Now, what's happening is there's organizations that are hiring people from all over. It doesn't matter where you are because they've all embraced this digital first world. And so what's happening is comp practices are flattening out. So it doesn't matter that you're in Idaho or you're in Kansas City or you're in New York City. You're still pulling the same. What matters is what your outcome is and what you do and what your skill set is and your expertise. You can jump on a Zoom call from wherever you are. So what we're finding is that sort of regional comp model is flattening out. And so we've got, you've got to be competitive. There's still market competitiveness, but that regional competitiveness is flattening. And so comp components don't have sort of a regional multiplier anymore. Now it's catching, it's not here yet, but it's coming because a San Francisco-based organization can hire somebody from another part of the world, and they're getting competing offers. So it's it's like the great game of musical chairs right now. There's so many people that are moving organizations. I've not seen sort of 6 or 7 offers for a software engineer. Now we're seeing, usually we would get to the offer phase and think, okay, we've got this person right. We've shown them all the love. They love us. We love them. Offer, boom, acceptance. Now it's offer. Oh, hold on a second. I got 6 other offers coming along that I got to just consider. So it's like, so you got to be competitive. You're going to lose people if you're not. So you got to be competitive with cash. You got to be competitive with equity. They're getting it from all other organizations. So it's interesting what this sort of digital landscape is doing to comp and sort of total reward.
Have you seen anything different in terms of your new drifters' motivation? Is there anything unique that's working to attract them in a fully distributed environment?
Well, I think what we're finding is you do have to show a lot more love in the process. Like they want to know, who is my mentor going to be? What is, Melissa Leffler, who's our VP of engineering, right? She's fabulous, right? We put her early on in the interview process. Usually she did the close. Now we've got to get her earlier on in the hook phase, so there's a lot more love that has to be shown early on in the process. It's an employee market right now. So like and you want them to carry on and continue the conversation. You've got to get them wooed in a lot earlier. So we're finding that. And then, a lot of candidates, look, cash equity is important to them, but mentorship, L&D, how are they going to learn? What are they going to be exposed to? How do I get responsibility? Those components are equally as important. So you've got to sort of show them that opportunity for growth and hyper growth and the ability for them to move up and manage is here. Or if they're an individual contributor and they want to be that principal engineer and they want to just get really focused on that area of expertise, well, you have to make sure that they see that that's a path for them working at Drift. So what I've found is it requires a lot more people more early on in the courting process of the recruiting process. I don't know if you're finding that too, but
100%, 100%. You've just articulated, you just stolen my introduction for the next speaker, is my colleague Rossa, who Dena.
Yes.
But Dena, I think a lot of what you've said there is also true for how we engage with our existing folks. Like if we think the external acquisition is tough, like the retention piece is
you got to re-recruit. No, you got to re-recruit them. We always tell the leaders, we're like, hey, you got to re-recruit these people a lot. And we've got to remind them that they need re-recruiting. And you've got to take care of your top performers. I think we forget that those individuals that are doing tons of work and overachieving, they're the ones that need that watering, right? Like spend your time on those individuals, connect with them as much as possible, because they're getting pinged left and right for jobs and you want them to not return them. And you want to make sure that they're like sort of locked in to Drift. So that re-recruitment component is really important.
Love it. I'm going to steal that term, re-recruitment. Dena, thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of the recent story at Drift. It really is a fascinating one. And knowing your people and knowing like a good number of your team, you guys really are doing exciting stuff. And it's definitely one of the most exciting companies to watch, I think, over the next 18 months. And please pass on our congrats to you and to the entire team on your recent achievements. And good luck in the next phase of your growth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you.
Good to see you, Dena.
Bye.